Hello, this is Power Panda, the creator of Final Fantasy VI Divergent Paths, an extensive modification to the original Super Nintendo game Final Fantasy VI. I'm going to be doing this video to showcase the hack, to let all of you guys know what is in store. This video has three purposes. The first is that now that I've finished, I want to do a full playthrough by myself and fix or tweak anything that might come up along the way. Second is I want to be able to demonstrate this to you so that you know if it's worth your time. No reason to ask you to dedicate 20 hours of your life, 40 hours of your life if it's not your thing. The third is that I want to create screenshots and a list of save files so that anyone who picks up this game can jump in at any point that they want. The way that we are going to do this is I'm going to be streaming the first part of the game from the beginning all the way up through the end of the 3 scenario split. At that point, I'm going to pause the stream because there's not a lot of changes for the next few hours of the game, and I'll pick up again when the changes start up again. This first stream is going to be an introduction to the hack itself, so I will be talking over the top of everything else. And we're going to reset and actually start a new game. Future streams, I will be reading the dialogue as it comes up so that if you are kind of watching in the background while doing something else, you'll be able to track with the story. I will limit my commentary to the gameplay segments. And part of what I'm going to be doing here is telling you a little bit of behind the scenes of the hack, so this is developers' commentary, but also just behind the scenes of Final Fantasy VI itself. So with that, let me start in on this introduction. It is another day and there's another Final Fantasy VI hack. Why should you care? Why is Divergent Paths different than any of the others? Well, Divergent Paths is at its heart a rearrangement of the story of Final Fantasy VI. A lot of people forget what game development was like in the 90s when games were considered more toys than art. When Squaresoft released FF6, they had no idea that it was going to become one of the most beloved games of all time. In fact, it didn't even sell that well on the Super Nintendo. So they got a normal development cycle on it. They had about 1 year from the time that they drew the first piece of concept art to when development wrapped and they sent it to the printers in order to make this game and get it out the door. And there's a lot of evidence in the game itself of scope crunch, that the production schedule got the better of them. Some stuff within the story, some of the way that the event scenes are coded, but also in the battle system itself. Final Fantasy VI has a very famous bug that the evade stat is never checked. So even though there's relics that increase your evade, you have shields, it doesn't matter. That stat is never going to get checked. And there's a lot of other bugs like that too, over 100 of them that was found when a disassembly was made. So when you get to things like adding a final layer of polish to the story, rearranging the content to flow better, to enhance character development, these things just weren't possible. And so the inspiration from Divergent Paths is actually from another famous 90s JRPG, which is Lunar the Silver Star. This game started out on Sega CD and was ported to the Sega Saturn, and then eventually to the PlayStation. Now the interesting thing is that the original development team was given a chance to not just port the game, but to revise it. And they took that chance. And they decided to fix in the game the glaring parts that they were not proud of as a development team. One of the main things was that Luna wasn't a very active protagonist. So she just was in the background of the story. When they came to the scene in the original game where Alex and Ramus board the boat and Luna waves farewell to them, they decided to make a change to that story where instead of waving farewell, she jumps on the boat at the last moment. And from that small change, a lot of the other storyline changes fell into place. It also led to the boat scene, which is some people's favorite scene in that game, the boat song. There were some gameplay changes too, a couple of different items, new weapons. But my question was, what would happen if Squaresoft had the chance to do the same thing to Final Fantasy VI? Divergent Paths is the answer to that question. It starts off with a simple change. When we battle Ultros on the raft, Edgar, who's just been reunited with his brother after years apart, sees Sabin knocked off the raft floating down the river. Now, does he act like a normal brother? No, he just says, "Oh, have fun," and waves goodbye. Well, that's not how a normal person would act. A normal brother would jump in after him and try to save him. So I have Edgar do that. And that begins a series of small changes to the familiar events of the game that start to cascade on each other, peaking with a very different series of events on the Crescent Island at the end of the World of Balance. In that, everyone's favorite general survives the attack, and he's given a chance at redemption. Then, in the World of Ruin, the echoes of the events that happened in the World of Balance are still felt, leading to several changes that close off many characters' arcs in a more satisfying way, both main characters and side characters. Now, Leo surviving is immediately going to draw comparisons to the famous General Leo Edition hack that's been out for a number of years. And I owe a debt of gratitude to that hack. Every time I thought of getting Leo in your party, my thought had been, how do you get him revived? That hack showed everyone that the best way to make Leo a playable character was to simply not have him die in the first place. But there are a few key differences with Divergent Paths and the General Leo Edition. The first one, which you'll notice right away, is that no characters have to be demoted to a guest status. So Shadow remains a playable character throughout the entire game, and Leo is added as a fully playable 16th character. In fact, in the World of Ruin, there's even a secret 16th character, which I'm not going to spoil until we get there. And that will allow you a complete roster, a full team of 16. The second thing is that Leo, rather than just joining your team, which is great, it was great to have him on your team in General Leo Edition, he actually gets a full character arc in Divergent Paths. I used existing content that wasn't tied to any other specific character, like the Wounded Soldier letter side quest and the Ancient Castle in the World of Ruin, and I repurposed that, tying it together with a couple of key new scenes that I've written to give him a beginning, middle, and end to his character arc. And with those, Leo goes from not just being a playable character, he actually goes to being a main character. He's got about as much story tied to him as someone like Sabin or Edgar. Now, while story is the main purpose of Divergent Paths, it's not the only change that I made. In addition to adding playable characters, there are a number of other gameplay changes. The first thing is that it includes almost every bug fix that's been made for Final Fantasy VI, being built off of the C.V. Reynolds bug fix compilation patch. And it also uses dozens of other small improvements made by the community to make the game smoother than ever before. Some of those are improvements that were made specifically for this hack, some of them coded by me. But some of the gameplay changes that you will see coming up is that there is a new Esper in the World of Ruin, that is Leviathan. There are 10 new spells from other Final Fantasy games, so you'll get things like Blind and Blink. And also Flood from the Game Boy Advance version, and also Octant, I believe it was called. Grav 3 is what it's called here, where it reduces the enemy's HP to 1/8. The other thing you'll notice right up from the start is that, well, actually not until we get into the mines themselves, but the number of random battles in this game has been reduced by 1/3. This smooths out the pacing and adds a little bit of a challenge. I expect that people who play this hack have already played through Final Fantasy VI before, so by just giving you a smaller amount of experience as you play through the game normally, I'm able to add a slight challenge without having to modify... Oh, that's right, you can't do Bioblast on these guys. Without having to change event scripts or make things unfair. All the enemies are as you remember them, with a couple of modifications to boss fights that happen in a different order. Last thing is that with Leo being the main character, Leo needs a character theme, and I have given him one. It was composed by William Cage, arranged by me for implementation into Super Nintendo game, and then G Natek from the Final Fantasy VI hacking community sequenced it and added it. I'm really excited to show that off to you. Now, with all of the changes to the game, it can be a temptation to just say, let's change things for the sake of changing them. And that's not the design approach that I took to this. Even though there are a lot of changes to this game, all of the changes have been tested holistically to ensure that the game that you are playing never stops feeling like the Final Fantasy VI that you know and love. This is something where, going back to the original game, playing it years later, there are rough edges that you didn't notice when you played before. Divergent Paths seeks to play like you remember it, rather than what it was. So with that, I'm excited to demonstrate all of these changes. We're going to beat the Welk, and then I will pause this video. Well, I'll pause the video as soon as we get through the introduction, and the second video will pick up with the actual gameplay and me doing a developer's commentary. I'm excited. It's been a long journey, 4 years that I've been working on this. One of the things I will be doing throughout this game after we get through the introduction is, since I'm playing this on an emulator, I will actually be using the fast forward key throughout the random battles. And now that he's going back into his shell, we're going to do that. With the random battles, you guys have all seen these before, and even though there are fewer random battles in the game, they do kind of interrupt the stream. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time. So let me say that there are some storyline changes, and some of these are taken from dummied lines that were in the original game. Some of them are from cutscenes that we found out through interviews with the developers, and one of the changes in particular is even from Soraya Saga. She's one of the original scenario writers. That it's taken from a doujinshi novel that she had written, starring, well, it was called I think The Marriage of Figaro. But I'm excited about that one. Hey, what's the matter? Do you know something we don't? The frozen creature began emitting an eerie light. Wah! Hey, where are you? What's happening? So one last note before we get to the end of this is that all of the changes that I have made here have been done in line in the existing code. This does not expand the original Final Fantasy VI ROM. Well, the reason for that, we're going to stop there, just pause. The reason for that is so that you can play this on an EverDrive, you can make a reproduction cartridge of it, you can play it on mobile phone emulators. We've worked very hard to make sure that this will be as compatible as possible. With that, I'm signing out. Second video, we will start the actual story.